Okay. Let's see. All right. YouTube is telling me that I'm live, so I must be live. Happy. Man, is it Wednesday already? Holy moly. Is it Wednesday? Jeepers. All right. Wednesday. And last night I finished up the adventure. What are they called? Do they have a different word for them? I guess they call these landmarks. So over the past 3 weeks, I've been running, as you may have noticed if you're following the channel, blah blah blah. I've been running the One Ring, and I have been running the example landmark in the core rulebook called the Star of the Mist. I think last night I was calling it the Tower of the Mist. Either way, the Star of the Mist. These things they're calling, I believe they're called landmarks, right? Are basically scenarios. I don't even want to call them mini scenarios. Not necessarily mini. This one in particular is somewhat of I guess you would call it a location-based scenario. There is this location where there's a tower and there's some light coming out of the tower and there's some bandits around there. And so you have kind of a different things going on, and the party can essentially go through there, or sorry, the company, to use One Ring parlance, can go through there, and it's set up to uncover the mystery. Now, I'm just opening my window here. I just realized I'm a little bit warm. And so I've done some previous recaps. I'll just go over it in fairly broad strokes. I decided that they're going to start in Bree. That was going to be kind of their home base, at least starting off, was going to be Bree. When there's been 4 players, the 4th one only came to this session. So we had of our One Ring group, right? There's 5 of us, including myself. And in the first 2 sessions, there were 3 players and me. And then this last session, the other player was able to attend. And so we had kind of 4 players and then me. I had decided when I started this out, I'm going to start them off in Bree. That's kind of going to be their headquarters. We went through and did the patron selection. They chose Círdan the shipwright, who is from the Grey Havens, and it worked out. A couple of the characters, at least one character was from the Grey Havens, and they kind of worked on did some of that work on like, well, how did my character, that kind of character connections kind of stuff. How does my character know that character? The dwarf character said, oh, well, maybe, unusually for a dwarf, but my family was, I don't know if they were diplomats or something, and they were kind of stationed or they were living in the Grey Havens, kind of doing some work there. So he was in that area. And so it was, oh, I came through here. And, they kind of would just sort of put together a nice little idea of how they became a company, right? So we're starting off in Bree. Círdan basically gives them an errand. Now, I don't know overall in terms of a campaign, I hope that eventually the party will start to self-select their goals, but it might end up being a mix of stuff that I'm kind of putting out there for them and stuff that they maybe want to work on. And there's a few different methods where they get there. But for this one particularly, the first one was like, hey, Círdan's got this message for you, which is something's going on around Sarn Ford. Sarn Ford is this location basically at the bottom of the Shire that's really kind of past the southern edge of the Shire, but the road that there's 2 roads. One of them is the Greenway, that was the old road that goes and meets the east road at Bree. So you have this kind of Bree is at a bit of a crossroads with these 2 roads. There's one going south. There's other road, if you follow westward, that kind of is going off towards the Grey Havens, and it also comes around the Shire, and where it crosses the Brandywine, that is at Sarn Ford. Okay, so there's trouble at Sarn Ford, and they're seeing lights, some weird blue light coming from the mountains down near there, and there's been some trouble. So the party went, and the one of the things that's interesting, I guess, is that this is maybe the most, I don't know how to put this, the most mechanized system. This is gonna sound weird. Maybe the most mechanics forward system that I've really played and run. Okay, so I've done some 5th edition, not a lot, right? I did some 4th edition. 4th edition would probably be up there also. I've run 3rd edition, 2nd edition, 1st edition, or whatever. But most of my experience, I did some homebrew. I used to play and run. Well, I was mostly a player, and I ran a little bit in. homebrew sci-fi game for a long time, where that was my main game. So I was kind of outside not only the kind of D&D sphere, but basically the entire, all the spheres, where I'd only dip into D&D a little bit here and there during that time frame. But most of the systems, even fourth edition to a degree, there's a lot out there which is not really mechanized, right? You think of fourth edition, you think, okay, combat is highly mechanical, which to me always made sense more or less because it is very fraught and you want to make sure there's a lot of precision and things going on. It's like, I get that. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, but I get it. And you had skill challenges, but kind of outside those things, you're sort of left to your own devices to kind of do what you want to. And of course, playing OSR type games like, or classic games. And I think of like BX, right? There's not a lot of mechanics outside the core bits. Yeah, there's mechanics for dungeon crawling. Yeah, there's mechanics for hex crawls, and of course, it's mechanic for dungeons. But everything outside of that, which is actually a lot when you think about it, there's not a lot there. There's the stuff that governs thief skills, assuming that a thief is doing it. But other than that, it's kind of like, you figure it out. Come up with what you want. Use roll under, target 20, whatever, or just nothing, just, fictional positioning and whatever, and then go, right? You can, and I have played in and run in sessions where we spent most of the game not rolling dice, where we're just using all that fictional positioning and establishing of, I guess, authority in terms of kind of character authority, right? I am a ranger, so I know this, and I am a thief, so I know that, or I can do that, and just like, okay, great, and you kind of figure it out and you go. Here's some oolong tea for the working man. However, this game, there seems to be a pretty, should I call it strict? I don't really mean it strict in a bad way, but there's basically mechanical paths that you're meant to follow for a lot of it. Not that you can't do fictional positioning and stuff, but I think the game really invites you to use the mechanical pathway, because part of what that mechanical pathway is doing is introducing things like complications, which then drive more adventuring. It's, and I think that when you see these games with lots of rolls, where you want to ask them, well, why are you rolling the dice? Right? We talked about that in terms of D&D. You say, why are you rolling the dice all the time? What is the dice doing for you? And I think in games like D&D, it's because it's kind of a binary pass fail. By the book, of course, you can do what you want. The dice themselves, those results don't. It may implicitly be adding complications, but they don't make it an explicit part of the procedure, really. And that's why I think sometimes GMs struggle with it, because you'll just you failed at the door, and it's kind of, what are we doing? And it doesn't really do anything. The door, you can't go forward because you failed the door. It also doesn't really add anything interesting. It's just you failed, period, right? What do you do next? Whereas I think a lot of these other games, when they're asking for rolls all the time, what they're using those rolls to do is knowing that the more you roll, the more likely you are to come up with complications, kind of regardless of how good you are, or your character, that is. You're going to end up rolling complications, and those complications are supposed to make things more interesting, so that the game is essentially rolling forward in terms of content through the consequences of these rolls. So I think these kinds of games, to me, at least my current thinking about them, understanding, having done this, is that, okay, you got to kind of embrace the fact that you can be rolling dice. That's okay, right? That it's. I will sometimes balk at, and we'll get to it, because last night we did a council for the first time, and that's one of the ones where I'm like, cancel. I got it. Sometimes when I've read the systems on paper, they feel very mechanical, like a Burning Wheel, which seems very interesting to me, but it also feels extremely mechanical in a situation when you're having a council or something, where I kind of feel like that's where I want to get into real role play. And then it feels like in those systems, it's like, nope, we're going to roll this, that, and the other. And you don't get to it doesn't feel it. When people will talk about something and say, oh, well, you're doing this, and then all of a sudden you have to go do accounting kind of spreadsheet work. That's kind of how I feel sometimes when I read these things about, okay, now we're going to have this, that, and the other. We're going to roll it up. It's like, do we really got to do that? Can't we just talk it out, kind of thing? And but this system, I think, has mechanics for everything. And again, I think they mean you to use the mechanics for everything. But I think that I would say, and just, as I said, one of the benefits of that is that you get these things that you can work on. You get these hooks, in other words, to add complications, to make things more interesting. Oh, you were trying to sneak, but then the orcs heard you. So now what do you do? Okay, try to do that. Now this happens. Like, oh, okay. And it really is supposed to be kind of additive. And like I said, you can do that in any game. And I encourage people to do that in D&D games. They're playing and they just got to fail. Think of what that failure means, blah, blah, blah. But it's more baked into this kind of system, right? So, but it's been, I guess so. It has been a transition for me because I'm trying to play this, or part of the whole goal of this, just the way we've been playing for the last month, and my particular goal is to really learn and try to really get into the system. So I did a couple of shorts where I kind of posited some what I thought were like, oh, that's an intriguing hack potentially, but my goal was not to hack it up right away. My goal was like, well, let's see it play out. So these systems, for example, the council that we ran last night, like I want to run it by the book, and we were all kind of learning, and so we kind of, even if it sort of took us out of in a sense the fictional flow, we're like, okay, here's what the council is, right? This is how the council works. You do this, you do that, you do this, you do that, and then everyone understands it, great, go. And in the future, when everyone's kind of got a grip, we've run this a few times, it'll be more relaxed and might feel less like we're going through a very mechanical situation. But maybe it's always just going to feel mechanical, but that's also okay. I guess I'll go through what I did in the session. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, I had 3 characters who were pretty much at the end of essentially at the end. We didn't quite get through in the second session. So in this session, they were almost at the end. They'd, and this is going to be spoilers for Star in the Mist. They had managed to resolve the curse. Everything was quiet. And then one of the, there's a couple of, I guess, factions that are running. One of them's dwarves. And the dwarves are kind of here and they're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, literally in a sense, where they've got the curse that was kind of hemming them in from above. And then they're just sort of sitting there, and they also have those kind of bandits that are around, and they're mentioned as kind of one of a possible thing. So one of the things that the module does is when you get to this one area where there's some undead critters, it's actually it's actually a dwarf that causes the party to get attacked by them. It kind of, in a sense, summons them, though it's not a magical effect. It's just kind of like they ring this bell, and then that I guess that noise is enough to disturb the undead, who then rise up, and then the party's like, "What the f?" And at first, it's mysterious over who rang that bell, but then at the end, I think if you want to get in with a dwarf thing, you can kind of reveal this dwarf. So when they were kind of done with the curse and they're kind of walking around, I'm like, aha, this dwarf appears and he's holding the bell, but he says something like, "Oh, you seem to be doers of good. Maybe we can work together," kind of thing. But he's holding the bell, and I was like, "Ooh, what are we gonna do?" Right. So that's kind of where they left off. Now, one of those 3 players was very, very late last night, and then this other player who hasn't been around for the other 2 sessions was here. So what I decided to do was I decided to run them through essentially a truncated. I didn't quite get it totally right, but I got most of it right. Journey mechanic to get them from Bree to the rest, to where the party was. Now I could have done it. I'm fine with this. You just happened to be there in the background the whole time, or I think it's actually a female character. She was there. You just didn't notice her, whatever. But I thought this might be fun, and I thought when I realized the other player was going to be pretty substantially late. At first it was, I'll just be a kind of half hour late. Then it was like, I think I'm going to be an hour late. And then it was more than an hour. I'm like, this would be fine. But the thing I decided to do with this journey was, and I thought this worked out okay, was have the other players kind of interact a bit. So it started off with, okay, I asked that player, what is their character doing? Why was their character away from Bree? So remember, the party, the company started off in Bree, and then they were given this mission, and then they ran off. Hey, Krister. Party got their mission in Bree, and they're off. But this other character wasn't there. So I asked them, well, what was your character? Why wasn't your character? What were they doing? And they decided that their character was helping out some rangers fight off some, Mordor forces, servants of the enemy, out in the wilds, which totally makes sense. It fits with the kind of idea of this area, the Shire, etc., being kind of protected, right? The vigilance of the rangers holding things at bay, and so they were kind of helping out the rangers in a pinch and holding things at bay. And so when they get back, the rest of the company had gone. Then I asked the members of the company, okay, you had to leave, and and this is kind of a flashback and a little bit of what would we call it, a retcon, right? But okay, you're back in Bree, you're getting ready to leave. you know that this person's missing. So what do you leave them? Like, how do you pass them word of what's gone on, right? What do you leave for them to kind of know to follow you? Do you leave them a note? Who do you leave them a note with? Like that kind of thing. When that spawned some interesting conversation, which is kind of what I was hoping for. Some interaction. The other two players weren't just sitting on their hands as I was running this other thing, and they went back and forth, and they were talking about, oh, well, we could do this, we could do that. I don't trust that. I don't know if I trust them. I don't know if I trust them. And what they ended up doing was doing a 2-part message, and it was great because was able to roll for some skills. And going back to my idea of the kind of the mechanics of it, I'm just been into now just having them roll more. Whereas I think if I was running it in my game or in kind of a OSR game, I probably wouldn't have them roll for this stuff. But here I am because I want to add those. I want those. I'm trying to utilize these methods that I think the game is baking in for generating more stuff. And it would have been interesting if they had failed on some of these rolls and what complications would it have added. And I don't know, that would have been kind of neat. And maybe not even affected what's happening now, but maybe it affected something down the line. So anyway, what they decided to do was like, okay, I'm going to give this person a note, but that note is going to be encoded. And they used, the one used Riddle to basically kind of write this sort of coded message, and then basically a decoder, like, basically we were trying to explain it because one of the players was a little bit confused about it. We're like, it's kind of like, in A Christmas Story when you get the coded message over the radio with the Little Orphan Annie program, and then you've got the decoder ring, and then you put them together and you figure out, drink more Ovaltine. Similar kind of thing where the cipher, I guess, would be in one note, and then the text would be in another note, and so you'd have to combine them and do that, and then you'd get the full message. And that way, because I was trying to hinting at, I don't know how dangerous Bree was at this time, but we know by the time Fellowship runs around, there's some kind of suspicious folks in Bree and whatnot. So I thought, you never know where the spies of the enemy are and what's going on. So, better be safe than sorry. So they did that, and they made their rolls, and it all worked out. So great. So they got the message. Then I had the new player kind of plot their path down. And there's kind of one obvious path to Sarn Ford. The party took it, and then the new player took it, because it's kind of like you just go down the Greenway, cut over to Sarn Ford, and you're there. You could go around the Shire, but it's further. Presumably it might be safer in a sense, but it's further. And it was interesting too, because I rolled basically the same event in more or less the same place for both of them after doing these travel rolls. And so I had them, again, I pulled in the other party members and said, hey, if you guys basically got in the same spot, knowing that this character is going to be hopefully coming after you, following you, trying to find you, is there a way you could mark the way you went for them? And they thought about it a little more, and they came up with, okay, I make these little cairns. The dwarf is like, yeah, I make these little stone piles, and maybe there's 3 of them in a certain area, and then that, to someone who knows me and this character, through their backstory, whatever knows them, they would know, to do that. It's like, okay, great. And then we did the same thing at Sarn Ford. Well, how could you have left? Like, did you do something? What could you have done to, show the way? So we got all that. We got the character in pretty short order down to the adventure area. Now, instead of putting them kind of in the rocks like I did with the main party, I actually put them at the bottom of the ravine. And then when they started going around and looking, and I said, oh yeah, you can see the tower high above you. You can see this light peering out, because, we're kind of still maybe a little bit back in time for when the party solved the curse, because once you solve the curse, the light comes down. So I was like, oh yeah, you're doing that. And they were rolling to try to find. I said, oh yeah, well, and they used lore, and I was like, oh great, yeah, you could see that there's, this whatever's on the top of this cliff, there's definitely some dwarven looking foundations, but then it seems like human handiwork above, and so it stands to reason that there might be dwarves usually going down and not, they're making their strongholds down into the earth and into the rock and not above, so it makes sense that maybe there might be something down here. So they went looking around for it, and they missed a roll, and when they were doing their search, and I was like, great, you get surprised by some dwarves that kind of essentially take you into custody. And that was a great breaking point. So I said, okay, now you're done. Back to the other players. Okay, so then they kind of make nice with this one dwarf, and they decide to have this council. And so when they came to the dwarf hall, where the leader of this dwarf contingent is, there was the other player who was kind of in custody, and they say, I think this person's with you, right? They were nosing around like, okay, great. So we got the gang. back together in pretty short order. But I thought it was kind of fun. The one player, at least I hope, got to have a taste of doing the journey and stuff that they didn't get to do. Because when we played the other one shot that they were in, the other GM who was running this skipped over the journey. So they got to kind of do that journey and get some fatigue. They didn't really need it. But one of the things I wanted is I didn't want to just, I suppose there are a couple ways you can do that. There's just an interesting thing about journeys. Well, I'll get to journeys in a minute because I think I have a lot. I'm really interested in the journeys thing and stuff, but let me get that to the end. So then they have this, they do a little bit talking because they decide that, hey, before we have the formal council, can we talk about, because they wanted to figure out, because, a council, you kind of have a goal. Like, what are you asking them for? What are you trying to do? And theirs was that they wanted the dwarves to basically retake this place, to make it a strong point once again. And basically, if there's any bandits left over, kick them out and they'll help. And, make it a bastion of the free peoples and not let it be, in the shadow, so to speak. And the councils, it's like a skill test, really. I mean, if you just want to boil it down mechanically, it's a skill test. You determine how bold or how, what is the party asking for? And that kind of cost benefit analysis to the member. Like the party says, like, give me 100 horses and, we're going to give you a penny. That would be a really hard request because they're asking a lot from this authority and they're not giving much in return. On the other hand, if they said, hey, we have 100 horses to give you and all we want's a penny, then that would reverse it. In this case, they'd already solved the curse and they pretty much already solved the bandits. They weren't sure if all the bandits were gone and stuff like that, but in my mind, I'm going like I definitely wanted to get through everything. I wanted to kind of finish, so I wasn't going to introduce more bandits and more. That wasn't really part of my plan. I'm like, I'm thinking in my brain, I'm going, they're gone, but they don't. The players don't know that. So I made it favorable for them because they'd basically done most of the work. They weren't really asking the dwarves to do much other than, hey, kind of man up or dwarf up and just kind of make this place your own. The hard part's already been done, basically. The curse is down. They'd run off. They didn't know it, but they'd run off the bandits. So, like, yeah, the dwarves is going to be kind of an easy call. So that what that means is that you decide how much they have to, how difficult it is, and that becomes a number. And our number ended up being 3. And so then comes the skill test part where essentially the party decides their angle of attack towards convincing these people to do the thing that they want. And each one of those, you can role play down and do, whatever. It is ultimately going to come down to, it's a die roll. You could look at this as not dissimilar from something like when you see these posts about, run your social things like a combat. It's not dissimilar to that. You're going to be rolling dice, and essentially, you're each time you succeed, you thwack one of those number down. So when we know 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, and then if you don't, then you don't. And the pressure here is you only have a number of turns to do it, equal to a number which there's a role for this where there's basically an introduction part, and somebody gets to be the spokesperson and do something to intro the group. Intro the whole thing up, and if they roll well on that, you get more rounds in the negotiation part. If they do poorly, you don't really get less, but your margin forever goes down, and if you fail, it's bad. So you end up with, I think they ended up doing well on that intro roll, so they ended up with 4 rounds of negotiating or doing something to get the thing. So you have 4 rounds to get 3 successes. So it's a pretty tight window, but you can do the kind of like, oh, they got there but not all the way, and so what do they get? There's a different kind of ways to, different things to do with the resolution of the council. So what the party ended up doing was, the first thing they did was I think they tried to persuade. I think they worked on persuasion, saying that, hey, the curse is down, like that your time is now, like, to do this, and like that worked. Like, okay, great. And they were, I think these systems or these mechanics, to the extent that they're going to work or not work or be fun, it's really about, are the players going to really get into the role playing part of it, or are they just to say, like, I use persuasion and roll a die? Like, I mean, me as a GM, like, that's not enough. Like, no, that's not how this is working. Like, how do you, I'm going to say, how do you persuade them? I'm going to try to wring it out of them. Like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? But, some folks are going to be get really into it, and other folks aren't. And so I think you can have a lot of fun with this system, much like in combat, where if you have, even though in the end of the day, you're rolling a die versus a target, hit or miss, some people get really into the combat and they're doing all kinds of stuff and they're swinging around and they're really making it fun and evocative. And other people are just doing the, I swing, I miss, I swing, I miss, right? And of course, GM, and I'm not excusing GMs from that either, but you know what I mean? It's in the end, if you just boil it down to just mechanically, that's all you're doing, right? Rolling versus a target number. Hey, Croco. But you can kind of make it your own. Okay. I think the players appreciate having this stuff. I mean, obviously, I think in all these things where you're mechanizing these things that were often left non-mechanical, the good thing is the party has a chance to see what they're, okay, we have to get 4 successes and we only have 4 rounds, so I really got to go after the big hitters. I really need to lean on my best stuff because we have no room for error, kind of thing. But then, of course, that maybe the flip side is, well, they can also kind of game it up because everything is mechanical, and some people are maybe going to like that, some people are not going to like that. On paper, I tend not to love that, but it actually worked out. It works out fine, and I think especially when you're trying to teach everybody the system. I think similar to how I feel about dungeon crawling, that in these older games where it feels like these gears that you can just see them turn this gear and then this gear turns and this gear turns, so you can really see how everything's working. I think kind of the same thing here because you can see this gear. It's like, oh, okay, you really kind of see it. And even though kind of I think maybe in my ideal game, we wouldn't have this stuff and we would just have this conversation, and maybe I would eventually roll a reaction roll and I would add some modifiers, and maybe some players would say, well, that's not fair. Or like, how do I know that I did well or poor? You know what I mean? Whatever, figure it out. This, everyone kind of sees it. It's sort of in a sense, it's above board. Like you need 3, you need 3 good things and you've got 4 tries to do it, sort of thing. So the first one was like this persuasion. Then the second thing they did was they sung a song, and the song was supposed to evoke the dwarves of ages past, the first age, second age dwarves, the dwarves at some of the heights of some of their mastery, and sort of using this song to appeal to the dwarves to take up the mantle of their ancestors. Look at these great dwarves of old. You can be great again. And, it starts here and it starts now. And that role worked as well. So that went over really good. I was already thinking about some complications if it didn't, like, oh, they get offended or they just are saddened, that they don't think, that there's that kind of despairing where they don't think they're the equal of the dwarves of earlier ages, that kind of thing. But they made their role, so that one worked as well. And then the final character, who's a fellow dwarf, wanted to use their craft skill. Now, the book, when you're looking at these councils, has a list of useful skills, but it's not all encompassing. And they had a really good point about there's a broken bridge and stuff. So he was saying that like he will help with the kind of crafting, like this thing about we can rebuild, we can make it go, like look at my expertise. Like we can do this. We can craft, we can make this place a better dwarf home for tomorrow. And they also made their role. So they were 3 for 3 and they got this rousing success. And I was like, okay, great. But we saw the specter of these bandits that they were expecting to come up. And the issue is that with this, or not the issue, the challenge is, so here's one of the challenges, right? I know in my mind, we're not having a big bandit blow off combat or whatever. Like I'm not, I don't want to do it. And I have I guess I've already kind of been thinking about, I have plans for the bandit leader who I had the dwarves drop the name to them. Sabian, his name is, Sabian from Umbar, right? Sabian of Umbar. I had them kind of drop that name, and I had them say like, "Yeah, Sabian's gone, and we haven't seen him." We're kind of, I said like the dwarves, we're sort of watching things. He went off and he didn't come back. But the party's still kind of prepping, like, well, there might still be bandits here, and I don't want to outright, if I can help it, just say like, "Hey, GM, here, there's no band, like they're not coming back." Like I could do that, and if they really gone down that rabbit hole, like they're coming, I would have said like they're not coming. Like you could spend some time, and they're not coming. But I was thinking about, well, how can I do this in a way that's not just me breaking that fourth wall, so to speak, and saying like, and they're not coming. So I said, you know what? Well, let's have a bandit show up, like a bandit herald or some kind of bandit messenger roll in. So I quickly on my iPad pulled up a name. I found some list of kind of men names of Middle Earth, and I rolled them up. They didn't end up asking his name, so I didn't ultimately need it. And I had him come as kind of a herald into the court to sort of try to see if they could push over the dwarves, because the dwarves, to them, if we're talking about before this adventure, the dwarves had been kind of pushovers. So they wanted to lean on them to kind of return things to the status quo. Krister says, I'm not afraid to have plans for NPCs which might not live for long, or am I intending to keep him off screen until what you have planned for him comes to pass? Oh, I see. So, Krister, so I thought that this guy Sabian could be someone who might show up in the future. So we're doing the idea here, and I don't know if it's going to come to pass. We'll see. But the concept behind this group has been that it's an ensemble effort in terms of games. And what I mean by that is I ran this little scenario with a certain group of characters operating out of Bree. The first one shot that we ran was the other GM with some different characters in actuality. And when we kind of pinned down what years we wanted to be in, 100 years or so later, but in Gondor. And the idea kind of was that any one of us in this group could have an idea for a scenario and pitch it and say, hey, I'd like to run a scenario. And then you might have characters in other groups. So you might have, characters. We might have a whole roster of characters. So I have a character who's in this Gondor group. I'm running this Bree thing, but there might be someone else running a Bree thing. And there might be someone running something further out in Eriador or in Linden or in somewhere else. And we could all be kind of running things in the shared world, this Middle Earth, right? And I was thinking for the next thing I run, I could have Sabian show up. He could be someone who could be an antagonist, maybe not the antagonist, but an antagonist. As someone I could have pop in. I was already thinking about the Fellowship phase where we have rumors. I thought he's someone I could fold a rumor around. I thought it'd be neat to have somebody who they could name and have a little bit of, the one who got away, so that if something else happens later on, the next time I run something, it's like, oh, it's Sabian, Sabian of Umbar kind of thing. And he could be somebody like that. So since he escaped, I didn't move him out. When they assaulted the bandits originally, Sabian escaped. And instead of having Sabian show up at the end of this adventure and get whether I thought, I'm going to let him be gone so I can maybe pull him up later. That was kind of the idea. Krister says, I once heard the idea of letting the PCs fight an NPC party. The last one of the enemy party happens to survive, escapes, and becomes the BBEG. I mean, I think that stuff's great. I would never try to force that. Right? This means I had an asset who was already off the board. So for me, it's I already got this guy off the board. I just like to leave him off the board, kind of thing. But it totally makes sense. And I've had fun with somebody. Players don't like it when somebody gets away. Either they get away with something, they get away. They don't like it. It bothers them. I mean, it bothers me when I'm a player. That guy got away. Nobody gets away. We always have the last laugh. So that totally can work. So Sabian had run off, and I didn't feel like having him come back and just having some fight, losing, or having him run off again. You run away once in this thing or escape. That's fine. They caught him by surprise. He wasn't prepared. None of them were prepared. It was a massacre. Almost literally a massacre. The party got shadow for it because they ambushed them. So Sabian's out. He's gonna have to try to lick his wounds, figure it out. But I did have this herald come back, this messenger from Sabian. I had him acting really cocky, and he came in and thought that he was kind of ruling the roost, and he didn't notice that there had been a bit of a sea change due to the successful council, right? That the dwarves had bought in, and I said, this is our place. Why are we letting these bandits push us around? Especially since a bunch of the bandits were dead. It seems like their leaders run away. What the F are we hiding down here and letting them tell us what to do? And then, of course, in comes this smarmy sort of, arrogant bandit guy talking about, how they had a deal and what do you have the deal off? And then one of the players, because I wanted the players to be front and center of this, right? I didn't want this to turn into me having a dialogue with them myself. So I'm this guy comes in and he's like, what are you doing? What do you make? I thought we had a deal, and this is not what we had. This is not what we had discussed, and kind of, but really acting like he was kind of the guy here. And I think the players were kind of waiting for the dwarves to then answer. And I was kind of waiting for the party to do something. And then the dwarf player said, like, I'm going to take he has a mattock, like a big kind of axe, like hammer kind of pick sort of thing. And like, I'm going to start stomping the thing. So I had him roll something. It might have been awe, like he like, kind of doing that. And I was like, oh yeah. And then the other dwarves start doing that. And then finally the dwarf chief starts pounding his hands and getting up. And then, this scared the bejesus out of this herald, who then runs off. And then that got to be this sort of, which I really liked it because it was kind of thematically, I think it worked. It's, the spell or whatever, it roles have been reversed, right? The intimidators had become intimidated, gone, and so we could kind of put a bow on the bandits for now, but that the party knows that guy Sabian, he's out there somewhere, and who knows what he's planning to do. So that next time I'm doing something and I need somebody to be either instigate something or be in the mix, I could throw out Sabian, and the party will automatically, I hope, will have like, oh, I want to get Sabian, or oh, what that Umbar guy. Croco asks, what's the Star of the Mist? The Star of the Mist is the name of the scenario that I ran. It's the example. So it's not exactly the same, but Daggerheart has campaign frames. Campaign frames are defining a whole campaign. Well, this isn't that, but this is what the One Ring system calls a landmark, and a landmark is a scenario. And they have an example of one of these that's in the book called the Star of the Mist, and that's why I ran. Basically, the titular star is a gem that's it's the kind of cursed crown that is up in this room, up in this high room in this tower, and it's sending out light over the plains, over the fields, over the hills, over the dales, over the plains, and there are also some bandits around there. So that was the official end of the adventuring part of Star of the Mist. The bandits clearly routed, and the dwarves reinvigorated. So then it was time to get into that fellowship phase. Oh, hold on a minute. Why are you doing that to me, camera? The fellowship phase is interesting because it's essentially a mechanized downtime. So it does a bunch of things. It kind of resets you get to reset, your health, your fatigue. You get to get rid of some shadow. You get to add some hope. And remember, hope and shadow are these meta currencies that are playing. Hope you get to spend, shadow you gain by essentially encountering despair and other sort of dark evils and ills and things that weigh on your soul, pulling you down. Hope up, but you have to spend hope. And so you're, over the course of your adventuring, your hope and your shadow getting closer together, and if they meet, or hope dips below shadow, you become miserable, which makes things harder. I just love that. Like, you are miserable. And that makes it harder. And journeys add, I think it's fatigue. It's called fatigue. That kind of adds, so you become weary. So it's like these adventures are sort of piling on these things that just make it harder. And of course, you're getting hurt and all that stuff. And then when you get to the fellowship phase, it's kind of like for some period of time. In this case, it was basically the end of the scenario. But I think you could have fellowship phases that are in the middle of a longer adventure, so that you get to kind of spend some time and get rid of it. If you imagine when the fellowship ends up at Rivendell, they go into a fellowship phase because they're there for a couple of months. Other things are happening, and they're kind of taking care of these more longer term, what we would call downtime activities. It's all mechanized in a way, so that you pick the activity that has certain benefits. I don't think there's anything to roll on. I don't think there's any crafting or anything. And you also this is also when you do your leveling up. So you can also, at leveling up, there's no levels, but you can buy increases in your skills and in your virtues, or no, you can get virtues by getting you can do a bunch of that stuff to make it better. You get to get rid of some of your shadow, you get some hope back, you heal up, you get rid of your fatigue, and you get to kind of reset, maybe boost up a bit, and then do some stuff. And the kind of things you can do, if I'll go Let me see. Oops, what am I doing? Yeah. Let's see. Where are we getting there? I gotta go. I'm gonna have to go back a ways. Okay, I think it's before this. Yep, here we go. So you get these things, they call them undertake. This is their term for downtime activities they call undertakings. And so you have a few. I thought for sure they were going to gather rumors, which is why another reason why I kind of I thought it would be good to have Sabian around, to have somebody to attach a rumor to, as opposed to some random guy. I was like, oh, it could be Sabian. You can gather rumors. You can, and some of them, they're marked at Yule. You get a special fellowship time at Yule you get to do some different things that you can't do normally. So healing scars is at Yule, but you can gather rumors. You can meet your patron. You can ponder maps. You can raise an heir. That's Yule only. So recounting a story is also only Yule. You can strengthen the fellowship, which is one of the things that they did. That gives you an extra fellowship point, essentially, that you can spend on rolls and stuff. You can study magic items, which is also what they did, because they got a couple of magic things. They can write a song, which is cool because you can do songs at different moments and get some bonuses on there. And that's pretty much all of it. But I think it covers everything. I think it covers. I'm trying to think of what could be here. Basically your research is that pondering stories and figured maps is here. You're trying to essentially, to put it in, say, your kind of D&D sense, right? It would be, okay, I need to do research. That would be pondering maps stuff. Oh, I'm trying to identify whatever. That would be your studying of magic items. Oh, I need to meet the boss. That's meet the patron. Oh, I want to go to the taverns and find out. Like, that's your gather rumors. So you have the thing is that you're limited to one as a group, and then one for that's well, they're both for the group, but one you get to pick kind of anything you want, and then one you get to pick based on the calling, aka the class of one of the players. So that kind of limits you. You kind of pick one. Hey, you really need this to happen, pick that one. But if you want to do another one, it's like, this one's got to be connected to your class. At Yule, every character gets to do one their own, so it's a little bit more, but you only get that once a year. And so they talked about. So first we had to figure out. So there are a couple things you have to figure out. You have to figure out how long this fellowship phase is for, and I think we decided it was a month. Where you're going to be, because you have to be somewhere. You have to be somewhere. One of the players wanted to be in Mickle Delving in the Shire, and I was thinking, hey, why would you want to be there? I don't know if at some point you got to go, listen, if you want to avail yourself of the full resource, you have to be somewhere that's resourceful or has lots of resources. And Mickle Delving, I don't know, but you can also probably say, like, you're making day trips around the Shire. You could probably, if someone wants to stay at Mickle Delving, fine. You're in Mickle Delving, and if you guys got to travel to Hobbiton to do this and travel to somewhere else to do that, fine. But I think they ended up settling on, because they wanted, and which I like, they were trying to think thematically of, we got these magic items, we're trying to figure out what these wondrous items and whatever are. So let's go to the Grey Havens. So that was cool. So they're in the Grey Havens now, and one of the things that's interesting is you don't do a journey on your way out. And one of the other characters who's pretty knowledgeable about Middle Earth was starting to overthink it, because they're starting to think, like, yeah, but it's so far, and can we get there? And I'm trying to explain to them, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. I mean, you're not going insane. You're not saying, I want to go to Mordor for this break, where it's like, oh, you're going all the way across. Like, we're not going all the way across the map. We're not trying to. It's all right. Like, it's because the way I look at it is, you've done this thing that has momentarily lifted the shadow around, so that even though maybe the darkness is encroaching overall in this time frame leading up to Lord of the Rings, you've managed to clear out a patch of blue sky, right? It's a cloudless day, and it's that time where you can make a little distance and not be worried, and that's why you're not doing journey rolls and doing that stuff, which I'm totally fine with. Like, hey, the bandits were kind of the thing that was sort of holding things down right now, and there will undoubtedly be other horrors, evils, terrors, whatever, to come and cover the sun again. But for now, it's okay. all is well for the moment for whichever amount of days or whatever it takes to get. They don't have any mounts. They're all walking, so things are even feel a little bit further away. But it's like it's okay. All right, you're gonna get there. Don't worry about it. Don't overthink it and think like, oh, we got to stay here because it's too far. It's like I'll let you know if it's too far. Hey, Krister, glad you got your porridge. I'll let you know as a GM. I'll let you know if it's too far. If I think you're taking advantage, you're like, hey, we want to go to the fellowship phase. We want to be in Minas Tirith. I'd be like, okay, that may be too far, right? But one of these other places, I'm okay. Or I might say now it's got to be 2 months or something. If they were going to go to Rivendell, I might say, okay, you're going to need 2 months. If you want to go to Rivendell, that's a bit longer. You can still go, but it's just you're going to have to take more time. And at the moment, there's nothing pressing, right? I'm going to be really interested when me or somebody else starts tying these things together into a larger adventure. Because again, this was the end of the scenario, so there's absolutely nothing pressing. There's no brands left in the fire. It's just, hey, where do you want to be and what do you want to do? So it's like, oh, we can just go wherever. In the future, you may be having fellowship phases within the within an adventure where you have a week or maybe 2 weeks. Again, just like in Fellowship of the Ring when they stop at Rivendell for an extended period of time. Even you could maybe say Tom Bombadil, though maybe that's too short because I only think they stay at overnight. But what if they decide to stay in Tom Bombadil's for a week? Like that might qualify as a fellowship phase. But you're still within the adventure, so you still have ticking clocks. And you're going, well, you can spend as long as you want here, but other stuff's going bad outside. So how long do you want to stay? Right? That then becomes an interesting, I don't know, pressure. But there was no such pressure at the moment. So it was really just about, hey, where do you want to be thematically, RPOIs? Where do you want to visit? So we end up in the Grey Havens. I mean, the funny thing about that stuff too is one of the players was like, oh, where in the Grey Havens? And I was like, the western part of the Grey Havens on the shore. It's one of those things that you don't get, the books, at least I don't recall there being much description. I mean, they don't really, other than when Frodo gets on the boat, you don't get a lot of what the Grey Havens looks like. So, so I was like on the shore of the Grey Havens, like I imagine it's pretty elf homes on the coast, nestled against the shores, some deep water, harbor. I just don't recall getting a whole lot, but it was just funny because they're like, where? And it just struck me like, are they asking for an address? Like 651 Maple Street in Grey Havens, Middle Earth. Crocker says, might be gray. Yeah, it could be gray. It could be very gray. So we did everything. So and I would say that I think everyone had a good time. And it made me feel good that the player, so one of the players is a OBGYN, and they got caught up really late with work. And so they didn't show up until 9:35, 9:40, but they really wanted to come. They're like, I could be here in 20 minutes, we're like, because I think we were like, hey, just, go home. You've had a long day. Just head home. Don't worry about it. But they really wanted to be there. And I think that makes, me as the GM feel good, because obviously got to be doing something okay if somebody is like super late and wants to show up and not miss out. So that was nice. I thought the other player, that the fourth player who was there, they don't have quite the same rapport with the rest of the group. They haven't been around for these other ones, but I think they kind of integrated as best as they could, and it was fine. I mean, there wasn't a lot for them to do ultimately, and they didn't have the same, because they hadn't played through the other sessions, so they kind of got up to speed. But it was like you're really coming in at the end. But hopefully I gave them a little something, not just like, oh, you show up and the credits roll and you're done, kind of thing. I think the fellowship phase, I mean, I think everything's good. Like I said, kind of at the top, it's very mechanically rich. I mean, you just have mechanics for everything. But they did a good job because you have mechanics for everything, but it's not in what I would say the 3.5 Pathfindery kind of, it's not super crunchy. You just have these avenues that you have. And, like I said, I read through these undertakings. There are not that many of them. There's, I don't know, maybe 12 or so, maybe less. I don't know. What is it? We got songs, magic items, fellowship, story time, airs, maps. I'm only at 6. 7, 8, 9. Yeah, there's 9. Maybe 10 if I miss one, right? So a really reasonable number, so that you have these avenues you're taking, but they're not super niche and crunchy where you're trying to figure out like they're still, I think they're giving you enough, right? So they're giving you kind of a broad overview over each one of these is fairly broad, but they got this nice avenue and you can plug in there. And I think the same thing with their skills. Like this is a system in which it's not like what I'm used to in terms of like BX where you kind of go, oh, I don't know, maybe this, maybe that. I mean, which skill you use can be open argument, but all the skills have a place. It's not, like I said, going back to like BX where you might have a mechanic, let's say obviously for combat stuff, but then there's nothing. And it's like, well, if you want to run an X and 6 or you want to roll under this or you want to do a percentile, like go ahead. Like, no, here they have a system that they use. And I think they did a good job. It feels like you can find a thing that fits. They did it, they were able to figure out like, okay, here, how can we know about the width and breadth of things and we can kind of divide that pie up. But I didn't run into any gaps where I'm saying like, I don't know. And as usual, I'm always happy if we're doing that council and craft, you wouldn't think is a council type skill, but he found an application for it. So I'm like, yeah, great, go for it. It makes sense to me, so we can do it. So that I think worked well. Journeys is going to be the one where I think over time it's going to be the one that I think is not the most interesting, but maybe the most where I'm going to be eyeballing it more and trying to see how to do it. So again, I mentioned this in some other videos, but journeys are essentially, it's essentially, everything's, I mean, I keep saying it's essentially like a skill roll. Everything is a skill roll, right? And not every game, ultimately, either you get it for nothing or you have to roll some kind of skill. It's like a skill challenge in a sense where you have distances. So basically you have the distance you're traveling, and then you have these travel rolls. And the travel rolls basically tell you how far you're moving along this path from your beginning to your end before you encounter events. And I actually like that a lot. I'm going to try to figure out how I can steal that because I think it rewards you. So basically, instead of saying every hex you get an event, every hex you get an event, it's more like the better you are, the better your guide is, the more they are able to get you forward before you have to deal with something, whatever it is, which makes sense to me. If you have a really good guide, they're watching out for they're doing everything. So I like that. I like that. Hey, if you're really bad, yeah, every hex you enter, you might be rolling. But if you have somebody who's really good and they're doing a good job, it might be every 3 hexes before you have to roll something. So I think like, yeah, that's good. Now we have to keep in mind here that this is not an exploration type system. Basically, the map. But the map is player facing, not the hexes designations, but the overall map. People know where things are. They don't know like every square inch of Mirkwood, but basically the boundary where Mirkwood is, the boundaries of it, whatever, are known. It's known where the Shire is, known where these things are. So it's not about you're trying to explore and discover something new in that kind of sense. Like they discovered a new location, but the sort of the general area was known, even if they didn't know specifically. So it's about that picking that path. How will you navigate that path? And then when events, you're rolling and getting these events, and then those are engaging different people, whether it's the person who's out hunting, because there's really no rations. They have kind of rations. So the idea, I think, is that you're kind of out there hunting every day to get food. And so one of the roles can be, well, what happens when whoever's hunting is out there hunting or foraging? What happens to the scout who's looking ahead? What happens to this, what's happening out there? And how does that affect the overall travel? Which is really about that wear and tear. It's really kind of interesting because you start off in your town, let's say wherever your starting point is, and you're at full health. Like this scenario. Hey, we're in Bree. We got no shadow. We got all our hope. We're full. We're everything. But then by the time you get to your adventuring location, you're no longer fresh as a daisy anymore. You've picked up fatigue. You've possibly picked up shadow. So you kind of start off clean and glistening, but you've already gotten some dirt on you and you've already gotten worn down a bit before you really get to doing the thing. And it's kind of interesting on a meta level how they're kind of, you're starting off at this level, but you're already taking a dip as soon as you hit the road because of that road. So now the better you are, the less you're going to dip because those events are the things that usually trigger fatigue and potentially shadow. So the more efficient you are, the better you are at that guiding, then the less worn down you'll be. And if you're unlucky, you're just not very good, you might get worn down a lot. That's also about, well, how long is your journey sequence going to be? But ultimately, it is that series of rolls that gets you to some kind of encounter or adventuring area. That's what it's doing. Now, the game has a little bit of guidance in terms of, I think they said, hey, don't have some super long journey, break it up. If you're doing something like, if it's more than 20 hexes, maybe break into 2 things of 10. And I think if you look at the books and the movies, you can see how you could, I can picture in my mind how they might break it up into it. So you go, okay, the party with Aragorns and Bree, they leave Bree. They do a journey to Weathertop. And then at Weathertop, they're looking for Gandalf. That's like a little adventure spot there where they're trying to do something. And of course, they end up running into the Nazgul. But really, their thing was originally their point was, we're trying to get a trace. Has Gandalf been around right there? They don't know where Gandalf is. Maybe Gandalf. Maybe Gandalf went there. We saw some lights from the top there. We need to figure out if Gandalf was there or not. If he was, maybe he left us a sign. Blah blah blah. So that's kind of like, you didn't do the journey straight from Bree to Rivendell. You did the journey from Bree to Weathertop. Then Weathertop, maybe you say now Weathertop to Rivendell. So you kind of break it in 2, right? You can see where you kind of break it. So I think as a lore master, the GM, I think how you're breaking that up, if you are you encouraging the party to break it up? Are you finding these adventuring spots you can put in? By just using the journey rules, there's no real encounters. They're just sort of things that happen, and you role play it out, and you maybe do it as a group, and then you pay the cost. You roll some kind of skill, and you pay the cost. You can have encounters, but they don't really say how you're supposed to integrate encounters with the rest of the journey system. I would probably say that I would have an encounter maybe replace the journey thing. So instead, if you're going to have them run into a troll, that happens instead of the fatigue and shadow they get normally, and then you kind of roll up the troll and do that, and maybe they'll get fatigue or shadow or damage from the troll or whatnot. And you can kind of mix those in. I think it's also inviting you to take maybe a more leisurely pace to some of these things. So allowing folks to get little fellowship times if they're doing a lot of stuff. Because just like in the books, even though they're operating under extreme time constraints, there are still times where they just need to take breaks. They rest in Lorien for a long time. They rest in Rivendell for a really long time. They have these gaps where they're stopping and they can kind of get a little bit of recovery and do some of these downtime things. And I think when you're doing things like rumors and the maps, that stuff can be for future adventures, but it can also be for the next leg of whatever they're doing. Much like, hey, we get to Rivendell. Okay, so Elrond sends out his sons to scout the mountains. That's one of these downtime things. Okay, great. Or we're in Lorien and we're just healing. We have to try to get rid of some shadow and we need to kind of rest. Or, okay, that's that kind of thing, right? All kinds of stuff like that going on. So, but as a mechanic, I'm going to need to kind of wrap my head around there. I did look for some things on YouTube if there was anyone who had some really good content on journeys and sort of maybe customizing journeys a little bit. I'm not sure what word I would use. I couldn't find anything though. If somebody knows, then I'd be happy to watch them. I probably just something I'll have to do myself because I feel like that's going to be the thing where I'm going to feel it more. I mean, it makes sense given my channel name and everything that I might be interested in doing more with journeys. But I think that's kind of where I'm going to be. Is like, okay, how do I make these journeys, or what can I do with these journeys? Not necessarily hack them or house rule them, but take what they're doing and just make it not feel less mechanical, but maybe try to let the situations play out a little bit. Like how much to let these, almost like a little scene, just a little thing play out, a little moment. Okay, you lost the path. Like, what do you do? And drill into that a little bit. Maybe work in some character stuff because I think this game really is about the characters and their relationships. So it might be good to pill in. Well, like, okay, your drive as a treasure hunter, like how does that affect what you're doing, or how does this, try to get in there a little bit to really take advantage of what the opportunities that the dice are giving you. And that's the thing, as I mentioned before, you're rolling all this dice. What do you do? What are you rolling all these dice for? And oftentimes in some of the games, like the D&D like games, it's just this pass fail and that's it. It's like, well, either I did the thing or I didn't, but that's kind of all the dice are doing. I really think here they're inviting you to create complications, to create new things, to sort of drive things forward, to take these failures and turn it into something that is resonant and is thematic, and those despair and everything. Don't just have the shadow be, oh, take 2 points of shadow, which I was doing. I want to do a better job of saying, like, well, what is this? How is this meaningful to you? Like, what is this shadow? What does this look like? So you see this horrible thing. Like, how does that really impact you, kind of thing? And I think you want to use the dice, use these rolls, whether it's in the journey or other than kind of do that. And then I don't want it to feel like it's just like a skill challenge. So I think to be able to dive into these moments a little bit more would be good. And then also kind of work in some actual encounters, whether they're good or bad, just kind of work them in to kind of break things up and just give some other opportunities for choices and things to do. But overall, it was a very fun experience running the game. I'm really glad I did it. I will presumably be running more, but I'll be done. I'm done now for the time being because I believe if the way we left it last night was the other GM is going to go back to Gondor to kind of wrap up his piece. I think he wanted to roll. He felt like we were trying to rush the end of his scenario, so he wants to kind of roll back a little bit of his scenario and then fix a couple things, tweak a couple things, and kind of finish it, kind of do it right, so to speak, and kind of set up for the next part of that. So that's what we'll be doing next. Whew. All right. I got a jet. Thanks for hanging out and listening to me walk through this. I'm going to definitely do more on journeys, and also I want to look at how I can take some of the stuff I like about journeys and apply it elsewhere and do some other things. But this is a lot of fun. I really did enjoy the One Ring. Now that I've had a chance, I think we all enjoyed it. We all appreciated it mechanically. I don't think we ran into anything that we felt like we hated this mechanic or that mechanic. I think we got in the mode of going with it, and we did. And I think it does seem to fit the books. I know the material. I know that a few times people said like they really liked it because they felt like the mechanics and things they were running into was thematic to the Lord of the Rings. So I think that does come through, and we really dug it. And I don't think it's too hard. We had a lot of we're all new, and we had a lot of like reading back on things and trying to figure things out, and some gaps in between our sessions. But ultimately, I think the rules were pretty. Other than a few things that just I think we couldn't find in the books that I talked about earlier. Once you find them and you kind of remember them, yeah, I think it was all good. Anywho, folks, I'll talk to you later in the week. I thought I had something else to say, but I don't. Croco says, "Good journeying with you." Absolutely. Krister, everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day, night, or whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.